Hello, I'm Russ Dott. I'm a knife maker in Boise, Idaho, and I'm also a member of the Idaho Knife Association. The Idaho Knife Association is a group of knife makers, collectors, and just generally people interested in knives. We normally meet once a month to have workshops, learn tips and techniques from fellow members of the Idaho Knife Association. But as you can probably guess, COVID-19 has really disrupted our workshop schedule. So I'm going to host a series of videos, in which this is the premiere one, and it'll be a thin substitute for hands-on workshops. But hopefully it'll keep us connected at the Idaho Knife Association, and you might learn a thing or two, and hopefully you'll stay engaged with us. So this first episode is going to be hosted by Jerry Durbin of Durbin's Forge. Now, Jerry is a long-term member of the Idaho Knife Association, and many of us have gathered at his shop, especially at the fall hammer-ins. So Jerry's going to discuss a couple of his techniques. One, doing it by hand with water stones. Another one is how he uses a 2x72 belt grinder. If you're curious about how Jerry sharpens his knives, and just stand by, take a look. And at the end, if you've got some comments, please leave them in the comment section below, or email me direct, and we'll see if we can get some topics that are of interest to you. And we're open for all sorts of ideas. So here's Jerry Durbin of Durbin's Forge.
So I'm Jerry Durbin again from Durbin's Forge. Been making knives since 2014. Been interested in knives all my life. I've been sharpening knives all my life. Started out really early on a farm and worked on that way. I like to forge them in the wintertime, and I do stock removal in the summertime. So most of my steels are high carbon, 01, mostly 1075, 1095, 5160, and anything else I can grab my hands on. The IKA, we discovered it in September of 2011. There was somebody at the farmer's market as we were walking through handing out flyers. We got one. He was sharpening knives at the market, and we got an application for the IKA. I'm not a joiner. I don't join organizations very easily, and my wife had to talk me into it. I think she actually wrote the check. So in October of 2011, I joined the IKA. Was quiet for a long while until I got used to it. I really liked the organization. In January 2012, the first class I actually went to, it was a group of people that all had an interest in knives. We all met in a garage and got to see and talk about knives. And so from that point on, I've been involved with it a lot. I've enjoyed it. It's a good organization. It's a magazine subscription. I was secretary for a couple of years, so you can blame me for some things. Tried to organize it and make it interesting for people. I try to have a hammer-in. We've hosted the hammer-in the last few years out here at the shop. I think it's big enough for people to enjoy and gives them opportunity to get together and socialize with other people, like-minded people. Most of my knives I like as utilitarian knives. I don't like safe queens, and so I try to make them so that the price point is such that people can afford them and use them. And I have quite a collection of safe queens that are very expensive knives. I never wanted to use them, so they became collectors, and to me that's not my focus. I like them to be used and passed around. Kitchen knives are my focus of late. Skinning knives as well, not so much, and tactical knives. I'm starting to make some round knives for leather workers, so I'm playing with that pattern a little bit. And so those kind of my highlights. Guards and bolsters I don't do a lot of because that adds extra time to the knife and the expense. And what I'm finding for my customer base is that's a little more than what they can afford. So I try to make them so that folks can afford them and use them and want to use them. I don't want them to spend so much money on it that they're afraid to use it. That's kind of my story, and I'm sticking to it. So in sharpening knives, there's two different methods you want to try. One is the edge already done, or is it a brand new knife, or are you resharpening a knife? And to me, they're the same. It depends on the thickness of the steel when you start. I like my edges to be anywhere from 20 thousandths down to about 6 thousandths before I start putting an edge on them, that primary bevel. This is an old knife I've been using. It already has an edge. What we're going to do is we're going to resharpen it. It's an old 01 knife, 01 tool steel. I forged out of it years ago. A 2x72 grinder has barely touched it other than to sharpen it. So if you want to know, it's just all done by hand. So to start with, what I do is I use a black marker and I like to paint the edge. And what that does is it tells me how I'm holding the knife on the belt. And so I can try and keep it nice and even when I'm holding it on the belt. How I tip my hand has an importance where when you look at the degrees, and I don't pay attention to degrees, I look at how I want that primary bevel to be. One of the key things I do is on the very tip, I like each bevel on each side to center right in the center of the spine. So I check that as I'm grinding. And so if there's no questions, we're going to start. And I like to start with right hand because I'm right-handed. Variable speed is nice because I can speed it up, slow it down. Off the 4-inch wheel, it varies where I like it, but I try to be consistent whenever I'm sharpening a knife. So we'll do one pull here. So if you look at the ABS side on sharpening knives, they talk about rocking. That's what I just did, where I start and I rock back and forth, trying not to hold the blade on the belt so I don't create up heat. And you can't see it, but by my fingers I can feel a little bit of a burr has already started. So we've got one side, and if you look, you can see most of that magic marker is gone. I'm a little thinner back here, so I'm going to readjust a little bit back here, but up here it's all nice and even, so we'll do that one more time. Feel the smooth on the grind side, and I can feel a little bit of a burr here. So to back up a little bit, I'm doing trailing edge. This is called trailing edge. A lot of us, when we grind knives, we grind edge up. For me, sharpening, I like to do trailing edge, and I do the same thing on sharpening stones. So now if I want to do this other side, left-handed, this takes a little bit of practice. And now that we've got rid of the magic marker on this side, I can see that burr come up as I'm grinding there, and I can feel it. To test the sharpness, non-dominant hand, I'm right-handed, so my non-dominant hand, I hold it in my left hand. Dominant hand, I put my thumb on the spine and take 3 fingers and I run on the edge. Now and your brain will tell you if it's sharp. What I tell people too is the grain in your fingerprint should be able to fit on that edge, and if it can't, then there's either a burr or you're not where you want to be quite yet. So there's a little bit of a burr there, not quite where I want to be, so we're going to do it one more time this way. And we can see that burr come up, hopefully, and come this way. So if we look where my magic marker was on the edge, it's somewhat shiny, and that's what we want. And then on the other side, it's the same, about the same thickness. And we look at the point. So the left side is a little steeper on that tip than the right side, so we have a little bit of work to get them even. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but that's closer. And so there's just a little tiny of a burr on the left side, so what we're going to do is we're going to just do a real quick one like that. But the other thing I check is to make sure that I'm even on my bevels, because, and what I mean is there's no facets, so that you see multiple angles that you're holding the blade. I like them all one level down, and so we'll do this one. That's better. We've got a little bit of burr on one side, so we're going to try and knock it off just a real light. Okay, so this was a 220 belt, and ABS, and if you look at on the forums I found Bill Burke, they recommend started at 220, 240 to 400. I like to start with a fresh belt so the heat doesn't build up. I have a bucket of water close by so that if I do feel the heat building up, I can dip the blade, but because it's already got a handle on it, I try not to get anything wet. I try to keep them looking nice, especially for my customers. So the next thing is to test this and see how we do on our cutting challenge for a minute. Okay, so in between each of my belts in the processes, I like to test the edge and make sure that I'm getting as sharp, or if I have more work to do. I do leather sheaths. I don't throw anything away unless it's too small to not use. So this is all my leather scraps that I save. This is paper. Basically, I buy reams of paper by the case. I cut them in half, and then I test to see. So this knife is the one we just did 220 on the belt. And so it gives us kind of an idea of where we're at with the edge. And because I like to use the whole blade, I test both back and front. And so it cut pretty nice. The other thing I like to do is to cut leather, and I skin scrap. I like to draw cut, and so we cut nicely there. And a push cut. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's still, you can feel the teeth on it, the 220 teeth on it. So we're getting close to being sharp. A lot of people, depending on what you use the knife for, this is a good stopping point, but I like to go more. Okay, so after we tested the blade on 220 and it's reasonably sharp, we switched to a cork belt. Cork belts can be, from what I know of, they can be 320, 400, 600 grit or non-abrasive. This belt is a non-abrasive cork. That means there's no abrasion on it except for the green compound, and I used to use green compound on leather for just stropping, and so I just carried over with the non-abrasive cork. I found that works well for me. It's a nice polishing one. A lot of people use different grits for finish work. The green compound I think runs about 1800 grit if you're thinking about what grit it is. It's a nice start to a strop, but on this phase of it, what we're going to do is all the little teeth now that the 220 left, we're going to try and polish them away, and that'll give us a nice, almost a razor edge. And so if you're ready, we're going to start up and go. It doesn't take very much green compound, just a little bit to get it going. And then try to find the same spot on the belt that I was before. This throws compound back at you, so glasses are always useful to protect your eyes. So, I don't know if you can see it quite, but we're starting to polish just that little bit. We're starting to polish that edge and get rid of the teeth. A lot of people like the teeth. It gives you kind of a sawing effect. I personally, just because of my background, I like the polished edge, more razory, I guess, if that's a word. So we did a little bit on the one side, now we're going to switch on the other side. So one key thing is I like the hand on the side to hold the handle. The other hand I use to stabilize it so that there's no accidents to happen. That way I know where I'm steady on it. I try to keep the blade in the same spot on the belt, and so as I pull it, I adjust accordingly. Now here I can see where the way I'm holding it is a little bit different than on the other side, which is a nice round. So we have work to do holding this hand at the right angle. We're going to apply a little bit more compound. Okay, I don't know if the camera can see, but it's starting to polish and we're starting to lose those 220 grit. And the other thing too is when you check for sharp, a lot of times you won't feel those teeth, but it's still pretty sharp. And we'll check it here in a few more passes. And it feels like we might be ready to test it. I like to hold it and then you just draw through. And if you were watching in the 220, this knife this time cut much nicer. Again, we start at the tip because no one just uses the back end, and it slices through there really nice. We pick the leather again and it draws through it. I like to use the whole blade because you never know if there's a flat edge along the blade that you need to address. And you pick the little wind piece and see if we can skin it. And so we're getting a little sharper. So now it's on to the leather part. So the leather part is like a strop, but just plain leather. And I've been using leather strops forever. Actually, I started sharpening knives relatively often in 1978. You can take a piece of leather and just glue it to a piece of wood. You can, if you watch an old barber, they've got the leather strops for their razors. Leather is it's a stropping medium. I like green compound for the same reason we use the cork. Technically, I guess you don't need to go to leather from the non-abrasive cork, but it's just one step that I like to add because it helps polish the knife and add a little bit more of a finish to it. I like a nice mirror finish on my edges, so it's just the finish work. So again, green compound, and we do the same process as we were doing before. At variable speed, I like to run it about, about 25%, however that is. Buff it up. With leather, they don't cut straight, and so there's going to be some wobble, so you have to pay attention to that and be mindful of where you're at on the blade and the leather. Again, trailing, always for me, it's always trailing edge. So the belt is coming this way, so the edge I want towards me so that I can see where it's at on the belt. And here we go. With the tip, because it's on a belt, you want to make sure that you're not going to splice your belt. You don't want to cause damage to your medium. And we're getting rid of more of the 220 scratches. Just, it doesn't take very much. I've seen where some people use chrome polish on belts. And you can use pretty much anything. Everything is abrasive. And when you're sharpening, basically you're removing steel. Some type of abrasion is happening. And so even with this green and the leather, we're still abrading steel. We're still removing steel. I don't know if you can see that, but most of the teeth are gone. And on this side as well, a lot of the little 220 teeth are gone as well. So we're polishing them up nicely. And so that kind of, I go back before we ever started, one of the things that you want to do when you're sharpening a knife, especially resharpening, is any cleaning that you want to do. If you have to straighten the knife, you want to do all that before you start sharpening, because once you start doing that, if we were to go back and try to clean up this blade and sand it, we would be wiping out our nice sharpening process. So all of that has to be done before you ever start sharpening. But since we're already at that point, sharpening, we're going to continue on and polish them just a little bit more. I don't put a lot of pressure on the belt, just enough so that we're making contact. It's a feel that you have to kind of develop. We'll test him again, non-dominant hand, dominant hand, thumb on the edge, on the spine. And pretty much the full length of the blade. I can feel that edge, razor edge, in the grooves, the grain of my fingerprint. And so I think it's time to test him again. Okay, so again, I like to test. And I use paper and leather because there are the mediums that actually give us some background on how the knife will perform. On my knives, I don't test on fruit. I don't test on anything that can cause patina to the blade, because I like my customer to be the first one to make a scratch, the first one to make a patina. So by using paper and leather, I know that my knives are reasonably sharp. And when I'm done, I do scrape hair and see if it's hair popping. Every knife cuts differently, and it's all based on that bevel that you did, and hopefully when you were making the knife and grinding it, you thought about that ahead of time. So here, we're going to test on paper. So it's cutting paper. We're going to test on leather again. Again, I like to draw and push cut. So because there are some people that when they cut their vegetables, they don't slice, they push. And so check to see how we're doing for that. And so to me, right now, this is sharp enough for most people. We can test if we can find some hair that's left. And it's cutting hair. Okay, waterstone sharpening. I like Japanese waterstones simply because I've been using them for quite a long time. There's different grits. If you look at, like Murray Carter talks about, he likes the 1000 grit and the 6000 grit as really being the more common ones to use. I agree with that just because it's a nice finish. What I have is I've got a 220 grit stone. It's just like 220 sandpaper. If you don't have water stones and you want to set your bevel, your primary bevel, you can use sandpaper. You can tape it to anything that's nice and flat and then work it because it's still abrasive. And that's what you want, is a nice abrasive. This is 220. That one I've had since 1978. This is a 1000 grit stone I got in about 2017. I use this a lot of times to start my edge because I don't let them get very dull. Sundays are sharpening day in this shop, and so if my wife has any knives that are getting closer, need sharp, then she sets them out and I sharpen them. So this is what I start with, the 1000 grit, and then I go to a 6000 grit. And that's what this stone is. Same thing, if you think in terms of sanding paper, this is 6000 grit. And I like to set them in water for about 5 minutes before I use them. Generally, if I start at 1000, I'll put the 6000 in the water while I'm using the other stone, and I go back and forth. This stone is a nice polishing stone. It's about 8000 grit. Hardly ever use it except for like my big chef knives to actually get a little finer finish on them. This is, I think, 10 to 12,000 grit. Hardly ever use this stone, mostly because that gets getting a little excessive. Razors like this sharpness. If I have a straight razor, I'll go to this stone. Stones, as you use them, will dish, and how you get them flat is you get them wet, and this is a flattening stone. And what you do is basically you're abrading one stone against the other stone. And so you get it wet and you drag it back and forth until you get it nice and flat. And how you, again, with the magic marker, you can set marks on the stone and you grade until you get those out. It's just like when you flatten a knife when you're working on it. And hopefully everybody's making sure their knives are flat before they start. To finish it, if I'm still not happy with it, again, green compound and a leather belt. I strap it on here for that nice finish. And again, I test it every time I change between stones and belt. Whatever I do in the middle of each process, I test to make sure I'm maintaining that nice sharp edge that I want. Woodcraft, if you're asking, Woodcraft sells a combination stone. It's 1000 on one side and 6000 on another. May, usually they have these on sale. So if you're interested and can wait, May is a good time to at least watch them. At least that's when I've seen them on sale. Otherwise, sharpening supplies online. I can get these stones. You can buy combination stones at a pretty reasonable price. For travel, a combination stone is a nice one to have in your pack. The technique we're going to talk about next, you can do with a rock, a brick, anything that's abrasive, because all you're doing is you're removing steel when you sharpen a knife. That's all you're doing. You're just making that bevel when you do that. You don't need elaborate equipment to water stone sharpen. This tub is part of the kit that I bought back in 1978, but you can use any Tupperware tub that holds water. I have shelf liner, a rubber shelf liner underneath it to keep it from moving around on me. You need something that can go over the tub, and before I got this little bracket to hold my stones, I got a piece of wood, this piece of wood. I put small pieces of angle iron on it to lock it in place on the tub so it doesn't move around. Before I got that, I used the same rubber liner I put on here to keep the stones from moving. Now, this is nice in that I can put my stones in here. It gives them some support and it doesn't let the stones move very much. And so this is the 1000 grit stone. We'll put it in the holder. Make sure it's pretty tight, just so that you don't want it moving, because moving sharp edges is a bad idea. The other thing with Japanese stones is they've got Nagura stones. I've got a black and a white, and what they do is if you have really a lot of work to do, you can create a slurry on your stone. And how you do that is dip it in water and basically think of this as like a rubbing compound, buffing compound like the green. And what it does is it creates a slurry on your stone that you can work with. Major work, I use it. Light stropping, I don't use it. So water stone, I like water because I can rinse off any steel on it. because again, when you sharpen, you're braiding. And so when you braid, you're leaving steel. And so trailing edge, again, I start at the tip and I drag it across the whole length of the stone. I turn it over and I pull it to me. And then if you look at the knife, you can see where you're sharpening or not. Again, you can use the felt tip marker if you're not sure that you're holding your angle just right. If there's a lot of movement that you want to do on the steel, like if it's really bad or you're just starting, you can put one part of the knife and you can go back and forth this way. You want to and count your strokes, and you can go this way. But you want to do that for the whole length of the blade on both sides. You want to keep them even. And see, if you look at the stone, there's gray. That's steel that we've left. We're moving steel. And then so with just a little bit of work, I can remove it. And now I'm working with a clean stone again. Again, the tip. This hand is supporting and putting pressure. It doesn't take a lot, but you're just moving back and forth. And I do this. I count my strokes, and there's no particular recipe for it. I just do a few of them. I like to keep everything even. And wash the blade, wash the stone. Then we wipe it off, and let's see if we made it sharper or not. Okay, again, a test. I like to test again with paper, and I do leather. It doesn't matter which way I go, but I like to make sure that it cuts. And I like to hear whether it cuts evenly, or you can hear that little rough. That says that we changed a little bit of our edge as we were doing water stones. And when I feel this edge, I can feel a little bit of a burr. And so sometimes that burr, if it's just a real wire, and what's a burr? When you grind on one side, it pushes that steel over, and then on the other side, there's just a little wire edge, and that's just enough to cause a problem when you're trying to cut. So you try, sometimes a wood will remove it, sometimes just a real light move on the stone will remove it. Every little bit will make a difference as you're working with your knife. The other thing I test is, again, still with the leather. We check those. So that's with the 1000 stone. So now what we're going to do is move to the 6000. Again, if you're hunting or out in the woods or not in the shop basically, and you need to sharpen a knife, any flat rock, river rock, any of those will be just as good to get you a nice edge, because all you're doing is you're removing steel. So here we're going to start again. We're going to same motion on the 6000. We're going to start fine. And if we're not sure that we're getting the right edge, paint it. And black marker, you can use any color you want. Black was on sale, so that's what I got. So it will color the stone. So what this will tell me is if the angle of my hand as I'm holding the knife is uniform while I'm dragging the knife across the stone. We'll do a couple of strokes. Okay, so here you can see where here I'm not touching the stone, here I've touched it, and up here I'm missing it a little bit as well. If I turn on the other side, I'm completely missing this edge here. So that says that I need to change the angle that I'm holding the knife. We'll clean it up again, and because we didn't take any black off where we wanted it, we don't need to repaint. So this side's looking pretty good except for back here. Up here we're still got a couple spots that we're missing. And up here there's still just a little bit on the edges. So we're getting our edge back after we changed it a little bit on the first stone. This is the same reason I like to use a 4-inch wheel, is because I can hold the knife at an angle such that that 4-inch wheel works better for me than the flat platen or 10-inch wheel. Okay, so you can see this side of the stone is getting kind of gritty with steel, so we'll just turn it around and work on the other side. A lot of people like to do leading edge. Again, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. It's just what you were taught with and what works best for you. I think you need to sharpen 4 or 5 knives a week to practice. And then you kind of learn your own technique. It becomes yours after you've done it a few thousand times. Okay, let's test it on some paper again. So we're getting a nice edge. And leather. Again, there's no such thing as scraps until it gets so small you can't hold it. So that's pretty much the process, and you can go up as high a grit as you want. I like to, for most knives, 6,000 grit seems to be a good stopping for me if I'm waterstone sharpening. On the grinder, the 220, the cork, the non-abrasive cork with green and the leather with green, I can do it much quicker. And so if I need to, I can finish with the waterstones. But the waterstones have pretty much been set aside lately because I can do everything on the grinder. So I forge. In the wintertime I forge my knives, and in the summertime I do stock removal because it's too much hot heat out here in the shop, 107 one day. And so therefore most of my knives are high carbon steel, 01, 1075, 1095, 5160. And I found by my wife's use of knives, if I polish them rather than finish with hand sanding, the patinas and the pitting don't occur quite as frequently. And so the edge part, if I get that as a nice mirror polish, that edge will hold up longer. It won't patina. It seems to cut a little better. The blade itself, a lot of times when I sharpen her knives, I will clean them with a super fine, a gray Scotch-Brite, and then just do a real light black buff to polish them up, and then that seems to keep them looking nice longer.
Well, I really want to thank Jerry Durbin for both hosting me on the afternoon that we videotaped his sharpening techniques. He clearly knows what he's doing, and he's a great instructor. If you ever have a chance to work one-on-one with Jerry, you'll come away with a great wealth of information. So this is just a little tidbit of what he has to offer the Idaho Knife Association. The Idaho Knife Association has got lots of members with great specialized skills. So I hope to have videos interviewing a variety of our members, sharing their insights. But if you know of somebody or a technique that you want to have some videos on, you just let us know and we'll make sure it can happen in a timely way until COVID-19 allows us to get back together again. So again, thank you for watching our premiere episode, and again, thanks to Jerry Durbin.